Hello and welcome back to the Birdcage. I'm Jack Kenna all by myself today to give you a preview of the 8-9 matchup in the South Region, Creighton versus Louisville. We will talk about that matchup, talk about the Big East tournament, my thoughts, my opinions, how that went. And now we are officially 19 hours and 33 minutes from the time of recording until Creighton tips off against Louisville. That is technically the first game of the big dance. Obviously, there are some play-in games that took place yesterday and then later tonight. Alabama, an Alabama team punched their ticket, and then so did UNC. It was a very impressive game, actually. There was a game that went down to the buzzer, down to a buzzer beater yesterday. It was insane. Alabama State punched their ticket into the 16th place, and then North Carolina destroyed destroyed San Diego State in the 11th place or the 11th seed matchup. What's funny now is that's also in the South region, that 11 seed matchup, and I think they got a chance. I really do. We did a big bracket prediction in my last video when we kind of talked about Kansas. They're running the Big 12, and we touched on how we think Kansas will fare in the in the big dance. But this is a more Creighton focused episode here today. I have a little list of stuff that I kind of want to touch on, that I kind of want to talk about. And so we're going to get right into that. First, we're going to take a little deep dive into the Big East tournament that took place last week, kind of wrapped up on Saturday. So this was 6 days ago. Creighton took on DePaul in the quarterfinal matchup. DePaul obviously beat Georgetown to get to this point. And not many Creighton fans were very nervous about this game, considering we haven't lost to DePaul in like 25 straight matchups. But that was put to the test. And DePaul did a very good job making Creighton take A, tough shots, and two, not even get into rhythm. And I thought it was very impressive. I was very impressed by DePaul because they showed fight and grit and determination in a year that had it's been a stepping stone. Don't get me wrong, the past 2 years have been worse, but they knew once they were done with the Big East tournament that they were done. And I didn't expect this kind of fight from DePaul. I expected Creighton to come out ready to kind of just take care of business, and that's not what happened at all. In fact, DePaul was up 15 at halftime. They went into the halftime break 36-21. It was just one of those games where you're like, what in the world is going on right now? Creighton couldn't buy a bucket in the first half, and DePaul just kind of gave it to him. It was very impressive. It was a very impressive display from DePaul, is what it was. And it was the worst kind of display for Creighton because you're sitting there and you're like, man, right now we're kind of teetering the 8-9 line. If you lose to DePaul, that could drop you to a 10. That could also, if you were thinking Creighton was on the 7-8 line, that could bump you to a 9. So a loss against DePaul on a neutral site would be a bad loss. This team won 4 conference games all season, 14 and 19. A stepping stone from a few years ago. Chris Holtman's been doing some good things there, and this season was definitely a building block towards the right direction for DePaul. But it wouldn't have been a good loss. Creighton was down what I think is just incredible. Creighton was down 11 points with 2 minutes left to go in the game, and they came back and got the win. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't pretty. It took 2 overtimes to get it done, but they matched the deficit that they had in the first half. They matched that and reversed it in the second. They outscored DePaul by 15 points, 11 coming in the last 2 minutes. There was a point in that game where Creighton was down 41-26. And you're sitting there and you're like what's going on? How are they possibly going to come back? And they did it. And towards the end of the game, there was just so many winning plays. Fedor had a few three-pointers. Stephen Ashworth recognizes his own defense and nails a deep, deep three, even when he wasn't playing his best game. And those are winning plays right there. Now, in overtime, that's where I really expected Creighton to just pull away. They kind of dominated the second half. Ryan Kalkbrenner was just disgusting in the second half and in the overtimes. I was really expecting Ryan Kalkbrenner and Steven Ashworth to kind of just guide Creighton past DePaul in first OT. That didn't necessarily happen. They had a little bit of a lead, but DePaul came back, hit some shots, forced double OT, and that's kind of where Creighton was able to take care of business. But one important thing about that game was the importance of Ty Davis. Now, Ty Davis is a true freshman and just hasn't gotten a ton of playing time this season because of the situation Creighton's in. Every game's kind of must win. Stephen Ashworth is was playing at an all Big East level first team player all season. So he just didn't get a whole lot of time later in the year and kind of once conference play started. But then Stephen Ashworth fouled out, and Ty Davis stepped up, played important minutes down the stretch, hit 5 free throws. He went 5 of 6 from the free throw line, finished the night with 7 points. He was a very important factor in that game, and he really was one of the reasons why Creighton was able to escape New York City with a quarterfinal win over DePaul. Now, obviously, the man of the entire game was Ryan Kalkbrenner. He was everywhere. He did everything you asked him to do. He was terrific. He had 32 points, 9 rebounds, 5 blocks. He played almost the entire game, almost all 50 minutes. But man, oh man, he was just incredible. And then that's kind of leading us into this next game here because the next game was against UConn, who did have the game after Creighton, yes. But that game didn't go into double overtime. And so you're sitting there and you're like, how well rested is this team going to play? Or how much rest did this team get, first of all? Do you expect this team to come out ready to play, playing against UConn and Dan Hurley? Now, in my Jays Classic interview or the podcast where we kind of discussed the Big East tournament, I had Creighton facing UConn here in the semifinals and then defeating UConn. However, I was not under the impression Creighton was going to have to go to double overtime to finish off DePaul the night before. So I was really up in the air about this game. I wouldn't say I was negative, but I wasn't as confident as I would have been if we just took care of business night one. With that being said, this team started the complete opposite of the way that they started the DePaul game. They were hot from the start of the game, and a lot of that has to go to Jemiah Neal. Jemiah Neal just made life difficult for UConn to start the game. I think he contributed to the first 11 points of the game, 9 points of his own, an assist on a Jason Green fast break dunk. And that was the story of the first half, was just how great Creighton played offensively. Now defensively, UConn hit some shots in the first half, and especially 3-point shots. They went 6 of 9 in the first half, so that's 18 points right there. And Creighton only went into the halftime break up 11. So when you're thinking about it, Dan Hurley came out in an interview and was like, "Oh, like, Creighton couldn't have played much better, and this is probably the worst we played all year." Like, no, no, it wasn't. Your team was 6 of 9 from three. That's pretty darn good. You can be upset with the way they defended, but they for sure have been very dominant offensively, making some deep, tough shots. Aiden Mahaney hit one at the buzzer. Creighton was up 14, goes into the half only up 11. But we all knew it's UConn, it's Creighton. Creighton is very good at giving up 10-0 runs, giving up scoring runs of a big margin. So we knew something like that was going to happen. And it did. UConn fought all the way back here in the second half. And it was just one of those games where you're like, oh, wow. Kind of just, you almost let it slip away. Creighton shot 8 of 26 in the second half. And a lot of this, I think, is because of just the way that UConn guarded the ball. I feel like they guarded harder and forced Creighton to take tougher perimeter shots. However, Creighton was still in the ball game because they decided, or they didn't decide, they just didn't turn it over. And that's such an important part of basketball is just making sure you have enough possessions to get a win. And Creighton in that second half did that because they weren't shooting the ball 70% like they were in the first half. And that's what was really important was just how good Creighton took care of the ball and how responsible that they were being on the offensive end. They were able to slow possessions down, look for great shots, look for good matchups, and just make UConn pay. The game did get pretty close. Creighton was able to kind of separate themselves towards the end of the game. A big thanks to Jason Green. He played terrific. Jason Green had 19 points, 8 of 10 shooting. He made a three-pointer. He was a playmaker. He was a board getter. He did everything you needed him to do in that UConn game. And that was what was very impressive was just how great he was in that UConn game. I remember one basket, my favorite basket of that entire game was he got into the post on Caravan and posted up Caravan and got a basket. And in my head, I'm like, that's the same Alex Caravan that was being talked about being Big East Player of the Year, being a Big East first teamer. And Jason Green just went right at him and right through him. It was super impressive. It was super awesome to watch. I'm glad Creighton got out of New York's or left that building that night with a victory because beating Dan Hurley is just so awesome. Jemiah Neal had an incident at the end of the game where the clock was out. UConn gave up and he dunked the basketball. And Diarra did not like that very much. There was a lot of fighting, a lot of bickering. All I don't really have much to say about it. You don't do it if you're Jemiah Neal, right? But I'm glad he did it against UConn just because I cannot stand UConn. I think any UConn fan, any UConn player, any UConn coach making a comment about that dunk towards the end of the game obviously hasn't taken a big look at themselves in the mirror because that's all UConn does is they brag, they brag, they brag, and they can brag because they are back-to-back national champions. But if you're going to talk it, you better be able to take it. And UConn wasn't able to. Hassan Diarra made comments about respect for the game, but Hassan Diarra is also throwing out fists. So how credible is he? I really don't think Hassan Diarra would have like a chance against Jemiah Neal in a fight, but that is off the record. Maybe I'll do a hypothetical podcast like that later after the season. But then that takes us to Championship Saturday in a game that I thought, wow, it was it was very clear who the home team was that game, even if it says it was on a neutral site. St. John's, their crowd was ready to go. They were amped up. My parents have gone to Madison Square Garden before, and they were laughing with how many St. John's fans were there because that's usually not the case. The past few years when St. John's has been bad, they don't show up like that. So the very first thing I'm going to do is congratulate St. John's, and then I'm going to kind of start bashing them a little bit. Not a huge fan of the fair weather fans that they have. I understand in New York, there's a lot to do. If your team's not good, you don't have to watch. But then don't pretend to be a fan. Don't pull out your Johnny sweatshirt out of the closet 10 years later when they're relevant again. I don't know. I don't think those are true fans. I hope Fedor is okay. Now, we don't know the status for Fedor, I guess, in tomorrow's game. But he got twisted up. I can't remember who it was. Maybe it was Scott. I don't think it was RJ Lewis. But there was an instance where he rolled up on his ankle, got caught, and had to come out of the game, and he did not return. Definitely looked like a pretty bad sprained ankle. I really hope he's all right because those hurt really bad. Now we don't know if he's going to be ready to go tomorrow or not. I really hope he is, but that's just the nature of the game. You really don't know, and you don't know if that ankle is going to be feeling better tomorrow or if it was way better right away after he did it, if he could have went back into the game. We just don't know that. And so I'm very curious to see how McDermott manages that situation because I think it could be something pretty interesting. Because I think Fedor can be a key part to a little bit of a March run here. We just need to make sure he's healthy and 100% and ready to go. Now, I think Creighton actually guarded really well in the first half. I felt like Creighton forced St. John's to take a lot of tough shots and a lot of shots that they didn't necessarily want to take. They made Zuby Ejiofor shoot a few early threes, and in Omaha, he actually made two of them pretty early on in the game. And Creighton forced two straight misses from Zuby to start the game in the first half. And then Zuby Ejiofor realized that, hey, I'm going to have to kind of do something else because they want me to chuck up threes. They want me to take these tougher shots that I'm not necessarily the best at. And that forced St. John's to work towards the interior of the paint because they're not necessarily the greatest shooting team. And I thought Ryan Kalkbrenner defensively played very good in the first half. At the ooh, I was gonna say at like the end of the first half, but no, it's just like that's just how it was. St. John's off the bench, 8 points. That was, and those are swing points. Those really are. Creighton had zero. They only had two the entire game. St. John's outscored them by 10. They had 12. So you're looking at it and you're like, dang. But Creighton did very good stopping St. John's in transition and on fast breaks in the first half. And I feel like that's wise because they made St. John's play out of a set offense, run around. Creighton's defense was set, ready to go. And St. John's doesn't look nearly as good when you make them play in set offenses. And I feel like you could say that about every team in the country, but especially St. John's. Those guys are lethal out in transition. But if you have to get them set doing stuff, I really do think they're beatable any given day if that's the case scenario. However, that wasn't the case scenario because in the second half, everything flipped. Creighton went into the half with a 3 point lead. However, by the 11:30 mark, that was the last time Creighton would ever lead that game. There was a 7 minute stretch where St. John's made 14 straight shots, I'm pretty sure, which pretty much gave them a 15 point cushion. RJ Lewis had 2 points at halftime, and in the second half, he had 25. He looked like the best player in the entire conference, and he played like the best player in the entire conference. Zuby Ejiofor had a really good game. And there was an incident, not an incident, there wasn't a situation where Ryan Kalkbrenner was subbed out for Fred King, and Fred King got beat on offense and they called it an and one layup. Very questionable foul call right there on Fred King. I did not think it was a foul, just the way the game was being officiated the entire time. However, the referees called an and one on Fred King. So already, Kalkbrenner gets subbed down with probably 10 seconds into Kalkbrenner being on the bench. Fred King gives up 3 points. And then on offense, sets an illegal screen, which gives the ball right back to St. John's. And this was when the game was kind of close. And so, in about 30 seconds of gameplay, Fred King already gave up 3 points and fouled on offense. And that kind of killed any momentum Creighton had. It was a really, really tough game for Creighton, especially in the second half, because it looked like that they played a double overtime game against DePaul 2 nights before and a really close competitive game against UConn the night before that game. And so you're sitting there and you're like, wow, they just kind of ran out of gas. Ryan Kalkbrenner had a decent game. No one else necessarily played very well. St. John's was the better team on Saturday, and that's just kind of how the game went, and that's just kind of how basketball goes. Is 3 games in 3 days will wear you down, and Creighton looks like a team that have played pretty much 5 or 4.5 quarters of basketball before that. And so that's just, or 4.5 halves of basketball. And sometimes that's just the way the cookie crumbles. It doesn't go your way. St. John's had a terrific year. They cap it off with a Big East title, a Big East regular season and tournament championship. And they looked really darn good. Now, here were my thoughts after the Big East tournament. I wrote this down a few days ago and then I didn't really come back to it until now. This Creighton team showed that they are determined and they have grit and they're tough. And after a few of those early season losses, especially the Nebraska game and the Georgetown game, questioning toughness was there. It really was there. It was, you could have questioned how much the guys really, really wanted it. And you couldn't do that after this tournament. And you couldn't do that since that Georgetown loss. The determination, the toughness has all been there. And I'm really proud of what the guys showed, what the team showed, because nobody thought that this would have happened post Pop Isaac's injury. It was just one of those moments where you look at it and you're like, yeah, they came up short today, but they show that they do belong in that game. They show that they do belong. And that's what was really cool. Now, they just ran out of gas against St. John's. I touched on that. But the second half of that game, it just really, really showed. It showed who was the team who didn't have to play. I mean, St. John's still had to play tough games, don't get me wrong. But the team that didn't have to play an extra half of basketball, pretty much half a half of basketball, pretty much. That team came out on top. They were more ready to go. Now, I think the St. John's game also showed that Creighton could be very vulnerable if teams, excuse me, it's almost my nap time. I think St. John's game in particular showed that Creighton can be vulnerable if teams are going to press our guards. Now, that's not just on out of bounds. That's not just on getting the ball inbounds, but that's on out of bounds plays as well. We had two 5 second calls, and Jason Green on one play just threw the ball out of bounds on a baseline out of bounds. They couldn't get the ball in. And that's what scares me going up against Louisville and potentially Auburn in the next round is those teams are going to press you and they're going to be all in your grill and you got to be ready to go. But I just think it could be really, really difficult if one, our guards don't handle the ball very well, which we have seen instances this year where they have not handled the ball necessarily the best. And two, if our wings struggle inbounding the ball to our guards, dribbling the ball up the floor. We're going to need everyone to be ready to go on Thursday if we want to get that win. And another thing I noticed was Stephen Ashford just kind of didn't have his best the entire tournament. He's a player who averages around 17 points per game, and this was all kind of lowered because of his poor Big East tournament. But he just didn't shoot the ball very well. He had 10 points against DePaul, 3 of 16 shooting, 2 of 10 from 3. UConn, he had a good game. 12 points, 4 of 7, 2 of 4 from 3, but he fouled out. And then St. John's, he had 13 points on 3 of 19 shooting, 2 of 10 from 3. So he wasn't there. He wasn't at his best. And I really do think a lot of this was due to just the pressure. He was not like the pressure on himself and on the game, but the pressure that the defense was putting on Ashworth. He had to take tough shots. He really did. And I feel like that can catch up to you at a certain point where you're tired, you're just not really locked in, you're not really ready to go because you've played so much basketball for so long. And that happens, right? But I hope these last few days of rest were good for him because we're going to need the best Stephen Ashworth tomorrow if we want a chance to beat Louisville. The last thing I'm going to kind of touch on before we move and start talking about the NCAA game tomorrow is that there were new heroes each game. In the DePaul game, when Ashworth wasn't playing well and Kalkbrenner wasn't playing well for that first half, Fedor Zugic was incredible. 13 points, 5 of 6 from the field. And so was Ty Davis. We touched on his impact in the game. And so that was really nice that we had some role players stepping up in those games, showing that This Creighton team is a lot more than Steven Ashford, Jemiah Neal, and Ryan Kalkbrenner. In that UConn game, Jemiah Neal wasted no time getting out, getting out and just scoring the basketball at will. He had 19 points. Jason Green had a career high 19. It was incredible. And then St. John's, obviously, the team just kind of ran out of gas. But what was really fun to see was all these players who are role players. They do their job, they work within their role, shined throughout the tournament. And I would love to see another game or two, or three or four or five or six, where these guys are just ready to go. Now let's switch over and talk about this NCAA matchup. I don't necessarily know how much time I have left. I think I'm doing all right. Creighton obviously got a 9 seed in the tournament and will take on Louisville tomorrow for the very first game of the tournament at 11:15 a.m. And I think this is the toughest matchup in the 8-9 games. I think this is the toughest matchup of the first round. I think Creighton was underseeded. Now, I'll talk to you why I believe that. I think Creighton was well, obviously they were second in the Big East regular season, and then they got runner up in the Big East tournament. But then UConn, who Creighton has beaten twice this year, was given an 8 seed, and Marquette was given a 7 seed, even though Marquette has really struggled towards the end of the year. So I do think Creighton was underseeded. I think they should have been probably an 8 seed. I don't think they played good enough to get the 7, but I do think they should have been an 8, flip-flopped with UConn there. But also Louisville was extremely underseeded. And this is why this game's going to be so tough. Because Louisville finished tied for second in the ACC, obviously behind Duke, and then tied with Clemson. But they were runner-up in the ACC tournament as well. They were projected to be a 5 seed, anywhere to a 7 seed, and that was the lowest that people had them going was a 7. Now the committee obviously didn't really think that their resume was that impressive because they were given an 8 seed. I just think that is ridiculous. I think it's ridiculous. I think the committee made a few ridiculous decisions in the tournament. Well, that's in a different video, but I don't know. I think it was, I think it's just kind of insane to look at this Louisville team and be like, that team's an 8 seed. No, they're not. They're most definitely not an 8 seed. I know they've battled injuries pretty much all season, and I know that they did lose to Duke in the ACC championship without Cooper Flag. But man, that team is, let me tell you, that Louisville team is not an 8 seed. Now, whoever wins the matchup between Louisville and Creighton will have to take on the committee's #1 overall team, Auburn. So that just goes to show you it's not easy. The South region has been deemed the region of death by, I think, John Rothstein. So it's like, it's tough. It is really tough. Let's talk about what we can expect from Louisville now. Head coach is Pat Kelsey. They were dominant in conference play, 18-2. They really just got it together. They played their best basketball towards the end of the season, and they're a well-balanced team. The AP poll has them at number 10, but KenPom has them top 30 in both offensive and defensive efficiency. So they are well-rounded, ready to go. Now let's talk about some of Louisville's better players. Chucky Hepburn, the Omaha native, went to Bow West High School. He's on Louisville, and he's been a stud. 16 points per game, 2.5 steals a game. He's a do-everything point guard. He gets rebounds, he gets assists, he gets steals. He's elite. He is an elite point guard, and that's who Louisville has. Now, Terrence Edwards, the JMU transfer, is also on this team. He's their leading scorer with almost 17 points per game. So between Chucky and Terrence Edwards, they're getting nearly 32 points per game, which is just really impressive. I think those two are some of the best scoring guards in the country, not just the ACC in the country. And then they also have shooters like Rean Smith, who has missed a few games now because of injury, but is expected to return and play in the Creighton game. So I think all of those guys can be a real X factor in this game tomorrow, and I really hope Creighton has an idea how to slow them down because they're gonna need it. Now the big question that people are asking, about this game is how is Louisville going to guard Ryan Kalkbrenner? I don't know the answer to this question, but if Louisville wants to win, they're going to have to find a way to slow him down. I think James Scott is probably their best matchup. He is 6'11", has started a few games for Louisville. I don't know if it's necessarily been every game for Louisville, but he has started recently. He's played some big minutes, and he has the length and the mobility to guard Ryan Kalkbrenner. I don't know what their game plan is going to be, if they're going to try to push him out of the paint, if they're going to try to front him, have some backside help. It's going to look different for sure on a given possession, but slowing down Ryan Kalkbrenner most definitely needs to be Louisville's first priority. I could see Louisville doing something very similar to Nebraska, almost daring Creighton to shoot and daring Creighton to make shots. We've seen a few teams now do that this year, and those have been the games that have been really, really interesting and really tough because they put so much emphasis on Ryan Kalkbrenner. They're like, if you guys want to beat us, knock down some threes. And this Creighton team is just not the greatest shooting team in the world. We've seen that now. So I think that could be really, really tough. Now, how is Creighton going to guard Louisville? Let's talk about the vice versa real quick. This is also a tough matchup because Louisville has bigs who can hit shots. Noah Waterman is one in particular. They're going to need to be selective of when they want to use drop coverage and when they don't because Terrence Edwards and Chucky Hepburn are just volume scorers. And they also have guys like Reed Smith who can just shoot the ball. And so Louisville's a decent shooting team, so you have to be careful when you want to utilize your drop coverage. I think bringing Noah Waterman, first of all, into the game and having him kind of be on the perimeter could really hurt Creighton. Because how are you going to keep Kalkbrenner in the paint when they have a center like Waterman who can shoot the ball? Now, he hasn't shot the ball necessarily great this year. He's actually down from his numbers at BYU. However, there have been 10 games this year where he's knocked down multiple threes. And one thing in particular is when he makes one, he gets his confidence. And so you really don't want Waterman to knock down his first three. You don't really want him to knock down one because he'll have the confidence to keep shooting them, especially if Ryan Kalkbrenner has to come guard the perimeter. I feel like that could be a really tough matchup for Louisville. Now let's recap what this game is going to be because Creighton Louisville tomorrow at 11:15, very first game of the tournament. But it's also going to be a very emotional game because this has the potential to be Ryan Kalkbrenner's final collegiate game ever. Obviously, we'll do a whole video on the importance of Ryan Kalkbrenner to Creighton and all of this and stuff. But Ashworth, Neal, Kalkbrenner, they're all in it. This could all be their final game wearing a Creighton jersey. But this is also going to be the best game of first round, and I really do mean that. I feel like it's two competitive teams going at it, and I feel like we will. There's going to be one team who walks away tomorrow afternoon, probably at like 1 o'clock. They're just like, dang, dang. If one more shot could have went their way, if the committee didn't underseed a team here or there, like it could all be different. It's going to be a very important game because I feel like Creighton will have to be locked in for all 40 minutes if they want a chance to win this game. Same for Louisville, but especially Creighton. You can't come out not ready to go like you did in the DePaul game and then expect a victory. I think Creighton has the legitimate shot to win tomorrow, even though a bunch of people are already kind of like just throwing Louisville in. Now, obviously, they're playing in Lexington, Kentucky. It's going to be a glorified home game for Louisville. But I do think Creighton has is a matchup that anyone would be afraid to play. They have Stephen Ashworth, they have Ryan Kalkbrenner, Jackson McAndrew. If Fedor's ready to go, Fedor Zugic. They have guys, Jemiah Neal. See, I just missed one of them. They have guys who can beat you. And so you're not looking at this as a March Madness game and you're like, man, dang it, why do we have to do this? Like, why do we have to play them? I think this genuinely can be a pretty fun game, and I think it will be a fun game. I do think Creighton wins this game, actually. I'm going to go Creighton 78, Louisville 67. I think both teams score a lot of points. I think Creighton comes out ready to go with an 11-point victory. And at the end of the day, that's just what this game is. It's win in advance, win in advance, win in advance. You can't be thinking about the next game until the game in front of you is done with. Overall, I think Creighton does have a chance to get this win, but it's going to be important. They have to do a lot of things good. They have to guard the perimeter at a super high level. They have to make shots. We'll see if that can happen. I will be here with a post game recap of Creighton Louisville tomorrow, probably. There'll be a lot of good games of college basketball on, so make sure you are tuned in for that. And I will see you guys later.